in listen-only mode.
Well, hello everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our webinar, The Inspiration Cycle, How User-Generated Content Helps DMOs Connect Authentically and Drive Bookings. My name is Jim McCall with DMAI. Just a couple of housekeeping notes before we get started. We will be recording today's webinar, and we'll also be sharing a copy of the recording as well as the presentation slides about 4 business days from now. So check your email for that. We will be accepting questions throughout the presentation, so you can use the questions panel in your go-to dashboard. Submit them at any time through the presentation. I'll be monitoring those questions and serving them up to our panelists at the end of the presentation. And finally, before we get started, I just want to thank SimpleView, our partners, for helping us put together this great presentation that we have for you today. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce today's presenter. Peter Cassidy is the founder and chief product officer of Stackla, which is the only content marketing platform that puts user-generated content at the heart of brand marketing. And with that said, I'd like to now turn it over to Peter.
Fantastic. Thanks, Jim. Thanks for the introduction. And also thank you to SimpleView, who, as you mentioned, Jim, asked us to present today on their behalf. So you've done a good job there of introducing who we are. We are a content marketing platform who focuses 100% on user-generated content. We work with more than 60 travel brands globally, and in fact, we ourselves are. I've just lost the ability to skip slides here. One moment. Okay, so we ourselves are actually a global business. We were established in Sydney, Australia in 2012 and have recently moved across the US in 2014 and the UK and also more recently in Singapore. But that's enough about us. Today, what I was hoping to do was actually to tell you a bit of a story. This is one of our partners. They're called Hello World. They're actually a leading integrated travel group in Australia. And they help travelers book trips worldwide and build themselves as the experts in everywhere. Now, these guys aren't DMOs or a DMO, but their approach to destination marketing is actually really aligned, and I thought it was a great story to lead into today's presentation. So for context, Hello World, a relatively new brand. Recent survey showed that 1 in 3 Australians were actually familiar with the brand. So they had this mission to turn lookers into bookers. So in terms of the campaign they wanted to run around this, they had a few conceptual goals. They wanted to inspire people to start planning their next adventure. Inspiration was critical. They wanted to showcase customer stories. They wanted to show they truly were the experts in everywhere. But then more importantly, they wanted to generate booking inquiries. This had to have a real ROI outcome for them. And then I guess as an added side effect, they wanted to use this as a way to build a great library of traveler-generated content which they could use beyond this campaign, evergreen content, right, that they could use for months and years into the future. So as part of this campaign, they decided to stage the world's first Instagram relay. They launched it on World Tourism Day, which is September 27, 2015. It was actually anchored by about 80 different Instagram influencers that they'd identified, each one uploading photos across a certain time period. But then, of course, they also encouraged their own travelers, Hello World customers, to upload their own content using a Hello World Relay hashtag. So it was really a concerted push led by some advocates, but then actively encouraging their own travelers to engage. And the first step around this is that they knew that it all started with inspiration. The first part of that campaign was to make sure people were inspired to start dreaming about or planning their next adventure. But in fact, it didn't really end there. The inspiration piece didn't end there. They understood that inspiration was critical the whole way around that travel marketing cycle, right? So from the first moment someone sees an Instagram photo on their feed, they might see a billboard on the way to work, that dreaming phase begins. Then comes the learning phase. It might be researching different adventures or travel options, websites, for example. Retargeting becomes really critical, keeping the customer excited about that brand, keeping the brand front of mind, and then right through to the actual booking component. And then following on from the booking, ultimately when the traveller is sharing their own experiences and then using that to then inspire a whole new wave of dreaming customers. So really they saw inspiration being critical to that whole travel marketing cycle. As you can see though, there's a whole bunch of touch points that they had to consider all the way around that cycle. So what was actually core to all of this was content, right? So content was at the heart of the entire campaign. And what they realized is that, I guess the traditional approach to content is that brands go and create this content themselves. It's not necessarily all that effective, and it can be quite expensive as you begin to start personalizing content experiences. You actually increasingly need more and more content. So what they found is that the content that their own travelers, their own customers were creating was actually really powerful stuff. The photos were of real people experiencing real things, and that content was actually really inspiring. And I think of it personally as like the comparison to that, the standard stock photography of the gorgeous Photoshop couple with the impossibly white teeth walking down the beach. Often the real content is actually more inspiring than the manufactured content. So why is this traveller-generated content so powerful? Well, there's really three reasons that we put it down to, and we'll dig into each of these three in a little bit of detail. So firstly, it's powerful because it's real. And I think, if this screen, two words jump out at me: trust and decisions. I think they're important for different reasons. We look at trust around consumers trusting earned media more than any other form of advertising. People trust their peers. So if they can see people are creating great quality content about different experiences that they themselves are interested in, they trust that content, perhaps even more so than a brand or an organisation that is creating manufactured versions of that content. And then importantly, it actually also guides purchasing decisions. 81% of consumers' purchasing decisions are influenced by their friends' social media posts. So it's not that they just trust this content more, it actually drives real tangible outcomes in terms of purchasing decisions, which is really important. It's also powerful because it's relevant. I think what we've noticed is that travellers are inspired by experiences they see themselves enjoying. So just having user-generated content by itself is compelling, it's real content, but people want to see experiences being enjoyed by people they think are just like them. So whether they be parents with young children, or they might be teenagers travelling to party destinations for spring break, for example. So people want to see experiences being shared by similar travellers. And the beauty of user-generated content is that it's being created by every type of traveller you can imagine. They've all got vastly different styles and interests, but by showing people the experiences they can relate to, in other words, content being created by travellers with similar interests, tastes, profiles, etc., then the results are exponentially better. So in this example here, I've got in the middle a picture of my wife actually. She likes travelling to Africa. She's under the age of 35. She's actually not under the age of 35, but she asked me to put that in there, and she enjoys hiking. So you can see here on the left, we've got some great user-generated content that's actually being tagged and categorized in a certain way. And what we've done is we've gone and found content that matches her interests, and then we've surfaced that in a content experience there on the right. In this case, it might be a website where we're seeing content that matches the criteria of Africa, hiking, and under the age of 35. Actually, recently I was booking a family holiday to Tahoe, and I was actually checking out some of the content being created by people at Tahoe, and I've got 2 young children, and the content that was actually really resonating with me was content being created by young parents taking their kids on ski lessons. So it's a perfect example of where if I'd been served up that specific content, it was going to be super relevant to what I was interested in. And of course it's powerful because it's in ridiculous volume. So you can see here literally how much content is being created each and every day across social networks. And that's really important, because if you start thinking about the requirements around starting to create these personal one-to-one connections with travellers, you need a hell of a lot of content to be able to achieve that. So that's where UGC comes in handy, right? So we're having tons of this amazing data to help you create sophisticated, highly targeted campaigns. That's really useful, but it's only useful if you have enough content to power those campaigns. So this is really like having thousands of photographers and content contributors filing fresh content for you each and every day. And increasingly, the quality is actually astoundingly good, right? I mean, with GoPro and smartphones, the content being created by travelers is better than it ever has been. And I think a key trend, I mean, it's something that we've all been talking about for quite a while, but mobile and how important that is to the entire travel experience. And some of these stats that stood out for me that we found quite interesting: 76% of social media users post photos to their networks while traveling. So that's just, if you think about, particularly if you're talking about millennials, that's just about everyone. So people are not only using their devices to share content while they're traveling, that's great. They're also then using their devices to book and research travel experiences. 52% of travelers make bookings using a mobile phone or a tablet. So I think the great thing about user-generated content is that not only is it being created on mobile devices, the fact that it's being created there means that it's in a perfect format to serve it back out across mobile devices, right? It's short form, it's highly visual, and they're little snippets of real sociable feeling content. So if we jump back into that Hello World story, now we've had a little bit of context around why they tried to do what they did. Let's have a look at the execution. So we can see here online was probably the most critical component to their campaign. They actually used this content to create an interactive map of the world. So these guys build themselves as the experts in everywhere, so of course it had to be a world map. For DMOs, for example, it might be a specific destination, a state or a territory. But then with this map, we started surfacing, or they started surfacing sort of pins on a map based on where content was being generated. And that was great because in this case, the content was almost, the location of the content was almost as interesting as the content itself. Well, look, lots and lots of people are posting content from Brazil right now. What's happening there? And people could then drill through, find the content being created in that destination, and then browse through content from real travelers at that destination at that time. They could actually take it one step further. They could click on a particular piece of content, and you can see over on the right-hand side, they could actually see where on a map that individual post was created, and then they had a call to action to actually go and book a trip or a tour that took them through that individual location, which is kind of cool. So UGC was really core to their entire online campaign, both from creating a visual map, an interactive map, then also just to the volumes of content they needed to drive the campaign itself across really every destination in the world. And then stepping outside of that, they then started looking at digital signage, right? So if this content is fantastic in an online environment, they've got access to all these other digital touch points. The fact that they could surface real traveler content in real time up on all these other digital touch points, like bus shelters, for example, it's really compelling content. They also did something that we'd actually never seen before. They put together a just-in-time TV commercial. I hadn't actually heard the expression just-in-time TV commercial before, but their agency had. And what they wanted to do, what they did, was that they actually gathered this UGC for a 7-day period leading up to when this TV commercial was about to air on prime time, and they preloaded the shell, I guess, of the commercial. But they didn't actually have the content finalized until the hours before this commercial was meant to air. And they started dropping in content being created by travelers hours before this thing was going live. And that was, I mean, I guess in some way it's a little bit nerve-wracking to not know the exact content going into a commercial before it airs in prime time, but they were confident in the quality of the content being created. And also, importantly, they wanted the ad to feel real time. So if there was, as an example, if the running of the bulls was happening at that exact moment, they wanted content from that event in that commercial. They wanted the content to feel real and real time. And then really, beyond those, they started thinking about putting this UGC at literally every touch point. they started integrating this UGC into their email campaigns. These guys are starting to get a little bit more sophisticated as to how they would target their customers via email. So they knew which destinations customers were researching or interested in, and then they would send user-generated content through those emails from people experiencing the same kinds of things that these customers were researching. They started putting this content through their advertising campaigns, through their paid media. These guys actually used AdRoll for retargeting campaigns. So the ability to retarget customers with beautiful carousels of real traveller content actually drove a great shift or increase in performance of those retargeting campaigns. And then they started repurposing the content across their own social channels, so their own Facebook posts, their own Instagram posts, paid or otherwise. The great thing about this traveller content is that it feels very native to those platforms. It belongs on those platforms. It's being created on those platforms. So this content actually performs really well in the brand's own social channels. Okay, so what were the results? Well, really it was a big win. If you remember, their core requirement was to turn lookers into bookers. So 7 days after launch, they had accumulated more than 20,000 posts from Hello World customers and travellers around the world, and of course their advocates, which they harnessed as well. And across those 7 days, they actually received more than 10,000 booking inquiries, which really was an enormous outcome for them. And we can see a quote here from Kate, who's their head of marketing. So that's a bit of an aspirational story, I think, of a travel brand who's doing amazing things in a really innovative way using user-generated content. But I thought now it might be a good time to actually stop, take stock, and then look at the underlying technologies that make this kind of campaign possible. So what we've got here is an overview of how our platform works, and I'll talk to this in a little bit of detail. And following that, I want to jump into some real tangible use cases with DMOs using our technology all around the world. So this is going to be a little bit more product-based, but we'll jump into the outcomes in a moment. So really, it all begins with this aggregation piece, which you can see at the top and in the middle there. So in terms of our platform, we aggregate from, I think, about 13 social networks globally, including Weibo in China and obviously Instagram and Twitter and everything else. But it's not just about the discovery of that content at that point. It's actually about the discovery of the best content, right? So whether that be applying rules or filters to say, look, we only want content that is being created in our own destination, or that mentions this certain campaign, or if the person posting it's got more than 1,000 followers, or if it hasn't got any inappropriate content. But we actually let you start applying all these different filters to ensure the content coming in is the most relevant, high-quality content available. Once it comes through that process, it then goes to this middle piece of the puzzle, which is the curation, moderation, and rights management component. So the moderation is quite straightforward. That's really the interface to let our customers choose which content they wish to publish and where they wish to publish it to. Is this going to an email campaign? Is this going to a website? Is this going out through a social channel? The curation piece is actually a little bit different. So the curation is around categorizing and sorting content based on a location, a language, a media type, a product that it features, an activity that it might feature. It could be a restaurant or a hotel. So it's actually starting to segment and classify content based on certain attributes. And that becomes really important because if you think, you're really building up this enormous library of content. It's like a digital asset manager, but it's just of user-generated content. So the more, in our world we use tags, the more tags you can apply to content, the more relevant and the more searchable that content becomes later down the track. So you've got the panels to moderate content, the interface to moderate the content. You're automating this curation component, which is classifying and sorting the content in really meaningful ways. And the third piece is the rights management component. So as you might have noticed with Hello World, they utilize the content in a web environment, but they also started utilising that content in paid media, so in advertisements. So in that sense, they actually started to they wanted to start asking for permission to use certain bits of content in paid media environments, and that's where the rights management component comes in. And I'll talk to that in a bit more detail in a moment. So once the content's been aggregated, it's been tagged and classified and sorted and then moderated, it comes through the platform, and it really can be used in two different ways. It can be used in your own media, so your website, perhaps mobile apps, could be email campaigns, anything else where you have a content requirement. Or it could be used in your paid media. So that might be retargeting campaigns, it could be paid social, for example, it could be digital out of home. And so when you're using that content through both those different outputs, I guess, what you then need to do is start thinking about how that connects with the technologies you use there. So from a CMS and CRM perspective, you want to make sure that this content can be really easily integrated into, let's say, your content management system. So you can see here with our partnership with SimpleView, we've got direct integrations into their CMS and CRM, so that becomes super simple. But really, even for any technology, it becomes very easy to drag and drop really widget components into any of those outputs. On the paid side, you want to start thinking about how this content connects with like a DMP or some sort of ad serving technology, which enables you to utilize the great data they have to then drive publishing decisions. Which content is getting served to which customer and when. And we can talk to that in a little bit more detail in a minute. So it's really, we really talk about it as an integrated content marketing engine, and that's what it is. It's allowing marketers to use this great, compelling, authentic content and drive it really into any touch point that they have. In terms of SimpleView specifically, this is a graphic I actually just stole off the SimpleView website, which is nice, but you can see how the integration with their platform works, where we're able to take that UGC in an organised way, convert it into the SimpleView products to enable very quick and easy outputs, websites, campaigns, meeting walls, etc. Okay, so I thought now we could jump through some examples of DMOs of different shapes and sizes around the world and how they're using different components of the Stackla product to create different kinds of use cases. So the first example here is Visit Scotland. They're using probably one of the most basic, in fact the original use case of Stackla. So they're bringing in content around lots of different I guess, activities that people look for when they're looking to visit Scotland. So the one we've showcased here is visiting castles. Obviously it's a big thing when you visit Scotland, so they wanted to start encouraging travellers to share pictures of castles, really, the pictures that were taken while they're travelling through Scotland. And then they're showcasing these across their website. It's very simple, the content's very visual, it's highly engaging, it's of a very high quality. And importantly, it's also rewarding and showcasing really engaged travellers. And it's a great way for them to actually reward those travellers who are creating really high quality content by promoting their content really, really prominently. Destination maps. So this is touching on the use case that Hello World used. They used one of our destination maps. They, of course, use this at a global level, so it was literally a map of the world. But we have other customers who use this very much at a local level. But the idea is you want to create an interactive display that allows travellers or people researching their destination or a journey through the eyes of their peers. And it's a great way to actually see where this content is being generated. And the way I like to refer to it, or think about it, is that the location of the content is often almost as interesting as the content itself. So if I'm thinking of staying near, let's say, a beach in a certain town, if I can see the content being created by people at that beach in hours ago or minutes ago, it's a really compelling way to get a real sense of the neighbourhood. competition. So we often get asked by customers, like, how can we get our travellers or even locals to create really high quality content for us to use? And I think the most common approach is to launch competitions. This one here is with Singapore Tourism. They asked travellers, and actually in fact locals as well, to start talking about their favourite experiences within Singapore, and the content that travellers were creating was being shared via certain hashtags or even being directly uploaded into our platform. It was presented in an interface where people could vote and vote for their favourite contests, and then they had winners that were announced. And the fantastic effect of this is really twofold. Firstly, by encouraging and incentivising this content creation, they had a whole heap of great content that was created. Now, if you think about this beyond just a simple launch campaign, having this great volume of content created actually is really useful for your evergreen marketing strategy, right? This is going beyond this campaign. The content might have been created for this campaign, but it's really useful for months to come. But secondly, the people who are creating this content would inevitably go and find the content and then share their own posts back out on the social networks because they wanted people to come and vote for their entry. So yes, you've got more content being created, but you then also have the creators themselves or the entrants sharing their posts out on their own social networks where you're getting a whole heap of organic reach to get people back to this destination to vote for content. So deep linking. In the travel world, we talk about this as deep linking. We actually have quite a few retail customers that use this technology and refer to it as social commerce. But effectively, it's the ability to apply a call to action, or really, even in very simple terms, a link from a piece of content to something. Now, in the case here, this is Hamilton Island. They're linking from a piece of user-generated content, in this case, an Instagram photo from a traveller, and they're saying, look, this guy took this photo while he was actually experiencing a sunset sail, web sail, so we want to apply that link to that piece of content. And what that does is it actually allows you to start letting people browse this user-generated content on your own site, but click through and to actually start making reservations, making bookings, perhaps even generating referral traffic across to different sites. It's a great way of actually driving a clear ROI on the content based on activities on the content, not just the content itself being inspiring, for example. So email. So it's interesting, we all know that email is a really critical part of and still is probably one of the most important components of any marketing stack. So it makes sense then to start thinking about how UGC could be integrated into email campaigns and drive value there. So I guess with email campaigns, the thing that we notice is that people are sending so many emails, and as I guess marketers are becoming more sophisticated with segmenting and personalizing content experiences within emails, the demand for content has risen significantly. So if we can start thinking about ways we can bring UGC into email campaigns and specifically start personalizing email campaigns using UGC, then it becomes really powerful. This is actually an example from Hello World in a little bit more detail. You can see here when they were sending an email campaign to someone who was researching Malaysia as a potential destination, they would then incorporate this component into their email, hashtag Hello Malaysia, and you can see here some great UGC if travellers in Malaysia, then a tweet talking about how fantastic their Hello World Malaysia adventure was. But this was only going to people who were interested in, specifically in a Malaysia holiday. If this person was interested in going to Hawaii, that content in that email would be very different. But you can see that the ability to draw upon all that great UGC makes that email personalization really possible. So paid social, this is starting to get into some interesting use cases now on the paid media side. This example here is actually with an organisation called Crown Resorts. They're a big resort group back home in Australia. And they they had this sort of interesting challenge where they've been known as casinos, right? They have a number of big casinos around Australia, but they actually have some fantastic resorts that are attached to these casinos. I'm sure they would probably phrase that differently, but they wanted to showcase traveller experiences in and around those resorts. But importantly, they wanted the ads to feel native. They wanted it to feel like they belong on Facebook. So the challenge is, I guess, with Facebook advertising, you've got, if you just think of it in your own context, you'll have photos of, a friend getting married, or maybe a sibling is having a baby, or something like that, and then you'll have an ad for a Subway sandwich, and it just feels really jarring. And so what Crown wanted to do is make those ads feel like they belong. So they started to use the data that they had around who was looking at these ads, and they said, look, in this case, we know that, let's say, a 30-year-old girl is looking at this ad, and we know that she really likes fine dining. So let's serve an Instagram photo of someone who would match a similar profile and who is fine dining at one of our restaurants. In another example, it might be a family, and in that case, well, don't show them this photo. Let's show them a photo of a family swimming or playing around a pool at one of the resorts. So they're able to start creating really personalised ad campaigns, and they were able to action that because they had this great volume of high-quality user-generated content. In this particular campaign, this was a few months ago, and it was relatively new for us to start thinking about paid social, and it really inspired us as to what's possible. They got up to 40% reduction in cost per engagement, and a whole other bunch of side effects. We've got some interesting case studies about that on the Stackla website if you're interested. And staying on that theme of paid media, we can then start thinking about retargeting. This is Hamilton Island again. They've done some pretty interesting stuff here with retargeting, and they realised that, look, if someone's browsing on their website for, let's say, a golf vacation or perhaps a sailing trip, they could retarget them with the exact content that they've just been browsing. It might be photos of a hotel room, or it might be pictures of a golf course. Or in fact, what might be more relevant is to be retargeting them with very fresh, recent photos of real people experiencing that exact thing. So you can see here, they've created an Instagram carousel of people playing golf on the island right now, and then they're retargeting me with that ad because they know I've been looking at golf trips to Hamilton Island. And we've been able to see some amazing increases in ad performance when UGC is used in this context. And the last one actually that I wanted to show actually doesn't feature a DMO, but you guys are mostly marketers, I think, and I thought you'd appreciate this. It is a campaign that was aimed at travellers. It's actually probably one of my favourite campaigns ever, so I really like highlighting it. And I guess to talk you through the use case, the client was actually Cadbury, and they wanted to get their customers and their fans and their brand advocates to create really high quality content around Cadbury products. But more importantly, they actually wanted to learn who those customers were. They wanted to know, like, who is actually posting great stuff about Cadbury, and how do we harness that? How do we actually capture some data around those people? How do we incentivize them to create more content? How do we reward them and thank them for creating content? So they actually used our rights management tools in an interesting way. They painted these London black cabs. They painted them the Cadbury purple. They put this hashtag JoyCabs all over the cabs, and they asked people effectively to take photos of themselves with these cabs and share them to the hashtag. Once they did that, they actually used our platform to reach out to the content creators, say, look, hey, we'd love the fact you're creating content around Cadbury. If you are okay with us using this photo in Cadbury's marketing campaigns, we'd love to give you a free chocolate bar. And that was literally it. The post had a little link for the content creator to click through to. This drove them to the landing page you can see there. This is all on the Cadbury website. All they had to do was really add an email address and a first name and accept that the photo was theirs. And they clicked an accept button. And then that was actually connected into their email marketing platform. And two things happened. It it took the email address of that person and it added it to an advocate or brand advocate segment in their email platform or their CRM. And it also automated an email to that customer directly with a coupon for a free chocolate bar. So the great thing about that is not only do they now have thousands, or I think even tens of thousands of great pieces of content of real travelers and real even London natives creating amazing content with the Cadbury brand, but they also know who those content creators are. So when they're launching a new product or when they're launching a new campaign, they can reactivate that bunch of advocates. And they can thank them and reward them and incentivize them to keep doing that into the future. So in terms of different use cases, I've gone through a whole heap there. I'm conscious that it's probably a little overwhelming. But I guess the main takeaway really here is that UGC, and particularly in the travel space, we can talk about traveler-generated content, it really fuels that inspiration cycle, not just from the moment someone sees a photo on Instagram or perhaps a TV commercial or a billboard on the way to work, but the whole way through. It's through that researching phase, even through to booking, and then finally back to sharing content back out to inspire that next phase of travelers. And that UGC can help you in a whole heap of ways. It's real. It feels very authentic. It can be really, really relevant when matched to the right user profiles. And it's in the vast volumes that you need to make content marketing an achievable task and a cost-effective task. So with that, Jim, that's pretty much what I prepared for today.
Awesome, Peter. Thank you so much for joining us and presenting. As a reminder, we are taking questions, so you can use the questions panel in your go-to dashboard to submit them. And let's jump right into them. We've got a couple questions around the issue of copyright laws and when is it necessary to get the rights from the user to share this content, and how does somebody go about getting those rights?
Yeah, great question. So look, I think that, first I should say that we're Twitter technology partners, we're Facebook technology partners, and we first and foremost really follow the rules that they've laid down. So in the case of accessing publicly available content, firstly, you're only ever going to be able to access content that is publicly available. If something is posted to a private Facebook profile, for example, you're never going to be able to aggregate that content through our platform. So that's number one. Then when it comes into our platform, we really think about, a good way to think about this is paid versus owned media. So if you're using this content via a website, for example, and you're showcasing traveler experiences, and there's an implicit acceptance for the person creating the content. So it might be they use your hashtag. Visit Hamilton Island, and they post that while on the island using the hashtag, and Hamilton Island use that on their website. Those guys don't ask for permission because there's an implicit expectation that, hey, it's public content and you've contributed to our campaign. So they wouldn't ask for the rights in that context. I guess it's similar to if you see tweets in the lower third of a screen on America's Got Talent, for example. They're not asking permission for those users. There's the implicit acceptance that they're contributing content to an open forum. On the paid media side, however, that's really different. Right? So you want to make sure that you've got very explicit acceptance by those content creators. In our world, there's actually two ways that you can do that, and something quite specific to our platform. That can be the first, which is what we call a rights via response method, where you basically reply to the person who created the content, and you say, if you're happy for us to use this post, just reply back with an approval hashtag. So it might be, Hamilton Island approves. And there's that acceptance of effectively the ability to use that content. But we have a second workflow which we call rights via registration, which is actually kind of the Cadbury example that I mentioned. So it gives the person a link. They actually have to fill out some data fields and then explicitly accept terms and conditions. Now the advantage of that is that you get a very explicit acceptance, but you also get the user data. So increasingly, even though DMOs really probably need to think about this from a paid media perspective, the advantage in capturing user data is so great that actually more commonly people are starting to ask really anyone who's creating great content if they can capture their data and use that content, whether they're using your content in paid or owned, because that user data is so valuable. Does that answer the question, Jim?
Yeah, that's perfect. One of the other things is when you talked about the commercial that the company was doing with user-generated content right before broadcasting, I think a lot of marketers today are starting to get nervous when they feel like they're losing control of their brand messaging and that sort of thing. So can you talk about, and your experience with working with DMOs and pulling in user-generated content for various purposes, how you assure them that even though you don't have full control, that you'll still be able to stay on brand message, and are the filters that you mentioned beforehand a way for you to do that?
Yeah, look, I think the filters are really a way to streamline a curation process, or to remove as much, I guess I should say, to automate as much of the curation process as possible. But in the same way that you're always going to have a human being write or publish a piece of content or a photograph or a video, you're probably always going to have a human being approve a piece of content. So the way we like to think of it is, if you're a destination and you might have 1 million pieces of content being created around your destination, or activities around the destination, let's say in a month, if you can use our platform to shrink that down to identify the best 1,000, it might be based on follower numbers or sentiment scores or locations or any sort of filters that we can apply, but you want to try to get it down to a small enough amount where you can really just skim through, identify the best stuff and publish. And the reason why we think that's pretty important is because we talk about content creation versus content curation and the time effectiveness, I guess, of content curation. So really the process then of skimming through, let's say, 100 photographs and approving 20 great ones is a really streamlined process. So I definitely, to answer your point, you definitely still will retain control of the message because you're still choosing which content gets published. Just to kind of ramble on a little bit more, interestingly, I've had some brands who have been kind of okay publishing not so positive content just because it's authentic. So it's the best, and in fact what we've noticed is the content that performs the best actually isn't always the highest quality content, but it's the content that actually gives great insights. So it might be a bit of a grainy photo, it might be on brand, but the photo itself might feel really authentic. And just to ramble on a tiny bit longer while I've got the mic, McDonald's is a client of ours, and they, when they started using UGC, freaked out because some of this content didn't have the McDonald's M in perfect focus, and someone's hand might have covered the branding on a chip packet or a thick-shaped cup. And it took them a while to get their heads around the fact that they were going to be breaking their own brand guidelines by using this content. But once they got through that, they realized this content was way more authentic than anything they were creating themselves, was getting better results, and so they were happy to start thinking about it in a little bit, in a way that's sort of different to what they traditionally had. Does that answer that question?
Yeah, that's a really interesting point that you bring up, and I think it goes back to what you said at the beginning about consumers' distrust of advertising, and I think that's something that a lot of DMOs are recognizing these days and changing their tactics to deal with. A lot of these DMOs may have smaller budgets and smaller organizations, so they don't necessarily have the resources of an organization like McDonald's. But is this something that a small team with limited resources could still be able to take advantage of?
Yeah, to be honest, I actually think it's ideal for small teams because to that point I made about content curation being better than content creation, just the demands really for any size team in terms of content marketing are greater than ever, right? There's more touch points, you know more about your customers, you need to create, like with every social network, with every email campaign, with every web page, with every app that you build, you need more and more content. And so for a small team to create that volume of content is insane. It's a huge challenge. And they can often fall back to, hey, we'll use stock photography or we'll use the same photo everywhere, which starts getting really stale. So I actually think it's a great tool for small teams to keep content really fresh And as I mentioned, the process of curating this content can be really streamlined, right? It could be looking at 50 photos a day and picking the best 10, but it's a great way to keep that all their content creative, fresh and dynamic without having a huge resource.
Awesome. And you touched on this earlier, but are you seeing much of a shift in DMOs and companies, but especially DMOs, pulling content from locals more instead of just travelers, as we see so many, so much research indicating that basically that's what travelers want, is to experience that local experience. So are DMOs starting to pull user content from locals more, and how are they doing that?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's actually, I actually regret not having a slide about that in this presentation, but we actually had Tourism Victoria, which is one of our first customers back in Australia. Their first campaign they ever ran with us was a campaign called Spotted by Locals. And they marketed to locals, they marketed to Victorians to say, hey, we want to drive tourists to Victoria, and they got locals to use a particular hashtag, Spotted by Locals, and they wanted people to post that to that hashtag if they're out having dinner or out at a show or at a beach. And then they also got local celebrities, so comedians and TV personalities, etc., sports athletes based in Victoria. They asked them to participate in that campaign. And then they use that content in, obviously, campaigns outside of Victoria to drive travellers to the state. But they still, even in the external campaign, they still plastered all over this campaign. This campaign is spotted by locals. This is what local people in Victoria are creating, and you can experience this right now. So I think that's a great way to think of it. And particularly with those destination maps, they don't have to be travellers in all around your town or state or city. They could be real people, right, that are creating content at the beach or in a park. And that content is just as compelling, maybe even more so than if a traveller was taking it.
And have you had any experience with destinations who are trying to develop experiences that are likely to create and inspire people to create user-generated content? I'll give you an example. I think it was a couple years ago, Tourism Cape Town set up some basically staged photo frames around Table Mountain, so that travelers would take a photo of themselves with Table Mountain in the background with their specific photo frame and hashtag, and then share that socially. Have you had experience with anything like that, and if so, positive or negative?
Yeah, that's a good point. I know that campaign actually. Just trying to think if something jumps to mind. I guess in a small way, the Cadbury example I just mentioned is kind of like that, right? They painted taxi cabs, and as a way, there's almost a reason for people to take the photos. I think competitions become an interesting way to inspire that as well. So if you could say, imagine if with Cape Town, if they'd actually rewarded people who took the best photos, for example, or they could let people vote on entries. It just drives the greater awareness and reach, and adds a new incentive on top of that component. They're probably the best sort of things that spring to mind. Sorry to not be able to give you too many more examples around that one, Jim.
No, that's great. Last question. How difficult is it for DMOs to get this content onto their platforms, be it their website, mobile apps, social media?
Yeah, definitely. So we try to make it as easy as possible. It's become a little bit easier again for SimpleView customers because as partners now we're integrating and have integrated actually mostly to their CMS. So for SimpleView customers, you'll be able to literally add a UGC component to any page. And in the same way, we're actually able to start pulling the user data that we're capturing and plugging that straight into a CRM, into the SimpleView CRM. So that becomes super streamlined. In terms of customers who don't use SimpleView, it's very straightforward. From a web perspective, we'll just simply copy and paste a little bit of embed code. And that same code can be pasted all across the site, and we just swap out a few little parameters to make sure the right content is going to the right pages. Of course, the displays could be very custom styled and made to look completely on brand. In terms of other technologies, we've got a suite of about 38 different plugins to different tools. So in let's say the the paid media world. We integrate with AdRoll and Seismic and brand networks, for example. In the web space, we integrate with Drupal and WordPress and Sitecore and a bunch of others. So we effectively try to enable very simple, seamless integration into those tools with just a few clicks. But if you don't use those technologies, it's really easy to take effectively a feed from our product and just plug it into the other tools. So let's say it's a mobile app, we just take a feed from our product and we effectively use it to create that experience within the app itself.
Awesome. I think that's all the questions we have. Peter, I just want to say thank you once again for joining us today. Also, thanks again to SimpleView for helping put this together. If you haven't already, make sure you register and come join us at our annual convention in Minneapolis. Both SimpleView and Stackla will be there in full force. Help you guys learn more about user-generated content. And we'll see you next time. Thanks again, Peter.
Thanks, Jim. Cheers. Bye.